Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 4 p.m. work session for the City Council, Lynchburg City Council. And first on today's agenda is review and discussion of the draft analysis of impediments to fair housing, and that will be Ms. Walker. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Tweedy, Vice Mayor Dolan, and members of City Council. As a recipient of the Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership Program funds, the City must certify to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, that its housing programs are implemented in a non-discriminatory manner. The analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, as we refer to it as the AI, includes an analysis of public and private sector policies, programs, and statutes which impact the development, financing, regulation, and siting of housing in the city. Identified within the AI are impediments to fair housing choice and recommended strategies that would eliminate the impediments to housing choice. In consultation with city staff, a draft AI has been prepared by the professional consulting team at Mullen and Lonergan Associates, M&L. M&L followed a comprehensive approach to complete the AI, utilizing many different data sources, city documents, and specifically conducted interviews and focus group sessions with agencies and organizations that provide housing and housing-related services to members of the protected classes. Ms. Marjorie Willow, a principal partner at Mullen and Lonergan, is here to provide a presentation summarizing the AI. The required public hearing will be held at the regular City Council meeting on June 23rd to provide the public one final opportunity to comment on the AI. And Ms. Willow will now give her summary of the AI for us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am going to take this off too. And thank you for allowing me time to provide you a more in-depth presentation and to allow for a discussion on this topic. So as Ms. Walker was explaining, the AI, the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, reflects the whole element of fair housing. And when we talk about fair housing, it's the right to choose housing, whether you want to buy or to rent, or if you're trying to keep your housing. So the right to do all of those things free from discrimination. And there are federal and state laws, and in some cases local laws, that protect people from discrimination in those transactions. And in those laws, there are specifically listed groups of people who are protected under those laws, and they're referred to as members of the protected classes. And there are seven federal protected classes under the Federal Fair Housing Act: race, color, religion, national origin, disability, sex, familial status, meaning having children, and national origin, meaning the country that you come from. Virginia adds an additional protected class of elderliness, meaning 55 and older. So this document, referred to as an AI, is a reflection of data analysis, identifying housing issues, fair housing issues, which typically revolve around housing discrimination information, as well as access to opportunity. It involves an identification of impediments to fair housing choice, or barriers that are restricting housing choice for members of the protected classes. And then finally, the development of an action plan, if implemented, then works toward overcoming those impediments. So as Ms. Walker said earlier, because the City of Lynchburg receives Community Development Block Grant funds and home funds from HUD, there is a requirement every year, and later this month you'll be required to sign a certification as part of your annual action plan being submitted to HUD. And there's a series of certifications, and one of those certifications states that the City of Lynchburg certifies it will affirmatively further fair housing. And the city has to sign that. The mayor will have to sign that in order to complete your application for significant funding that comes to the city. And what affirmatively furthering fair housing means is not only working to stop discrimination because you receive these funds, but also to work toward proactively desegregating areas that are racial and ethnic concentrated areas of poverty, and working toward integration. The only way that you can demonstrate to HUD that you are fulfilling those requirements of that certification is by completing this AI and going through this prescribed process. So that process involves quite a bit of outreach, and in November, we conducted a series of stakeholder workshops that were well attended by affordable housing providers, social service agencies, homeless assistance providers, and a host of other key community stakeholders. And we also held 2 public meetings that week. Then we drafted the AI document, again, using a lot of information from the census, but also a lot of policy documents, because at the core of the AI document, that's what it is looking at the policies and program guidelines and the local ordinances that the city has in place to determine, do those policies and statutes and programs expand housing choice, or do they work to restrict housing choice for members of the protected classes? There's a public comment period, a 30-day public comment period that's going on now and will end on June 23rd. And that same evening at the City Council meeting, there will be a public hearing 2 weeks from today. And that public hearing will cover the AI document, the draft document, as well as the city's draft 5-year consolidated plan and your draft annual action plan for 2020. And those documents are required by HUD in order to continue receiving your federal funds from HUD. And it's the city's intent then to wrap up this process and submit those documents by June 30th to HUD. So just a few slides that give you some of the summary of the findings we made. When you're talking about being able to access housing, one of the primary, not the only, but one of the primary determinants of how and where you can find housing is household income. And when you look at household income by race and ethnicity across the city, you find that there's a lot of disparity. So the median household income in the state is almost $69,000. In the city of Lynchburg, it's just under $42,000, so it's significantly lower in the city of Lynchburg. But then within the city, if you look at the median household income for white households, for black households, Asian households, and Hispanic households, there's great distinction, especially between white households who have the highest at over $52,000 and blacks who have just over $27,000. So your ability to afford housing, if you're only paying 30%, which is the rule of thumb, so that housing is affordable to you, so then you're able to afford things like childcare and transit and food and drugs and clothes and kids' activities at school. If you're, as a black family, if you're close to that median household income of $27,366 or even lower, you're going to have a much more difficult time finding quality housing that is affordable to your household. That's a significant drop. It's a little more than half of what the difference between what black households, the median household income for blacks, and the median household income for whites. Asians fare slightly better at over $39,000. And the median household income for Hispanic households seems to be high, and we think it's primarily because the population of Hispanic households are rather low, which means that the margin of error then for their median household income is going to be very high. But significantly between whites and blacks, it's almost 50% difference. So one of the things that we look at when we start this process as a way to be able to identify where there are concentrations of racial and ethnic areas of poverty in the city. When you look at areas of racial concentration or ethnic concentration separately from areas of poverty, it's a one-dimensional profile. But when you combine those and you find that those same areas of minorities, non-white minorities, are also the same areas with higher poverty rates, then that's really where you need to look at and see, okay, what are the issues there? Why are there lower income families living clustered in these or concentrated in these census tracts, as well as their higher poverty rates, higher unemployment rates, lower home ownership rates, as well as lower quality of housing. And then that's really when a community needs to look and say, what are those conditions that we need as a community then to improve on? And so when you look at this map, the yellow area, the yellow Census Tract 7, is a census tract with a non-white population of 50% or more. So more than half of the population in Census Tract 7 is non-white, and the rate of poverty is 40% or more. We also identified two census tracts, 6 and 11, that are adjacent to Census Tract 7, that they didn't quite meet those same 50% and 40% thresholds, but they were fairly close. And so rather than discount them all together, what we tell communities is if they're that close to meeting those thresholds, then they could basically tip either way. If policies and programs aren't put into place to keep them from increasing poverty or to keep poverty from increasing in those areas, then they will increase. And so Census Tracts 6 and 11 fell just short of the 40% poverty threshold. So they met the non-white. They weren't quite at 40%. And we've listed those neighborhoods. So Tate Springs, Darrington, Miller Park, Garland Hill, College Hill, and Diamond Hill. So the key piece to this AI document is the Fair Housing Action Plan. And after we go through the data analysis and the policy analysis, through that process, we are identifying impediments to fair housing choice. So things that the city is not doing or does not have in place, or that the city does have in place, whichever the case, but the result is that housing choice is being restricted. And by restricted, what I mean is this. If I'm a single mother with 2 children, and I live in one of those census tracts that I identified, and I want to move to another area of the city of Lynchburg, whether it's to be closer to a job, because my transportation is not very dependable, or because I want to put my children in a different school, a better school, or a safer neighborhood, whatever, be closer to my family, whatever that personal reason I have for wanting to move, do I have housing choice that's affordable to me in that area? Or is my housing choice restricted to those 3 census tracts by virtue of my income? So that's the flip side to, or the second element of fair housing. So the one that's most commonly known is housing discrimination occurring in our community. Are renters being denied housing, are renters being evicted unnecessarily or illegally, or minorities being steered away from buying houses in certain neighborhoods. That's housing discrimination that most of us are familiar with, if not in depth, at least on the surface. But the second element to fair housing is the degree to which members of the protected classes have access to opportunity that's provided to everyone else across the city. And by opportunity, we mean things like healthy housing, labor market, job opportunities, transit opportunities, and what is their level of access to those higher opportunity areas. So when we identify impediments, that's sort of the lens, the fair housing lens that we're looking through. in order to identify what those impediments are. So the first impediment is barriers to housing choices for members of the protected classes. And under this impediment, the recommendation is that the city basically develop its language access plan more fully and implement it. So there is a requirement that low and moderate income members of your community, who also may be persons with limited English proficiency, need to have the ability to access your programs and services. This is specific to the CDBG and the home program, but it's also across the city's, all of the city programs and services that it offers. But for this department specifically, there is a need to more fully develop that plan so that when persons with limited English proficiency want to participate in the housing rehab program or want to gain access to the youth summer programs or whatever services that the city offers, they understand that they know that they're aware of those programs, they understand how to apply for them, and that they actually have access to them. The second impediment is the location and type of affordable housing. So as part of this document, one of the key key community stakeholders that we typically interview is the local housing authority. So in this case, the Lynchburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority, because in most cases, the public housing authority is the largest landlord in the community, and typically the largest landlord housing the lowest income population in a community. And so we did look at some of their policies and programs. And one of the most effective programs to expand housing choice, affordable housing choice in areas of opportunity in most communities, is that Section 8, which is now called the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And so getting participating landlords who have rental properties in those higher opportunity areas to participate in the program then opens up those areas for rental to income eligible households. The second recommendation is that the city and other local organizations, primarily your stakeholders, should adjust the diverse housing needs for the city's various subpopulations. So low and moderate income households, persons with disabilities, and elderly persons, in terms of looking at what their specific needs might be. And specifically as it relates to persons with disabilities, we've never encountered a community where there is an adequate supply, an adequate inventory of housing that is affordable and accessible to persons with disabilities. In our study, we demonstrate that with data that people with disability, persons with disability are more often less employable because of their disability, but also have much lower income levels and then therefore require affordable housing. And the third action is the city should collaborate with local universities to ensure students are not competing with the low and moderate income for affordable housing. This is a very difficult one, but one that is common to university and college towns, so that, keeping in mind that there are low and moderate income students who are looking for affordable housing in the community. If they can't afford to live on campus, then it's setting up a increased demand for that same housing, affordable housing stock, maybe your naturally occurring affordable housing, with low and moderate income households who are not student households. The third impediment is the location of community assets. And I touched on that when I talked about being able to have the choice to live in areas of opportunity that have those assets. And these are those assets that contribute to quality of life in neighborhoods where any of us live, and where any one of us live, they could be different depending on our own our own personal desires. So whether it's parks and playgrounds, good schools, close to job opportunities, close to downtown, and all those amenities, whatever those choices are, and that's the key word, choice, are there also affordable housing opportunities there? And if not, are there linkages specifically with public transit, so that for families and individuals who live in Census Tract 6, 7, and 11, and should they choose to stay there because that's where they grew up, that's where all their family is, that's where all their support system is, do they, though, have access to employment opportunities that are located in different areas of the town, whether it's a business park or grocery stores, whatever the case might be. So creating those linkages and working with GLTC to enhance transportation, whether it's adding routes, service frequency, whatever the case might be. And then the second recommendation under this impediment is that the city and local service providers should centralize public services in locations with good transit access and high concentration of members of the protected classes. So where possible, if those services can be located in areas where they're most needed, if transit cannot be something that is provided then, to provide them access outside of their neighborhoods. And the final impediment is discriminatory behavior toward members of the protected classes. So this is a recommendation that I can tell you is made in every community that we work in, because you can never have too much fair housing education and outreach and enforcement. There's always new people moving in. There's always people who are becoming renters for the first time. There's always new landlords sort of churning through the rental housing market, whether it's landlords or tenants. And so there's always opportunity for discrimination to occur. And about 70% of all discrimination occurs in the rental market. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because renters are more likely to change addresses more frequently than homeowners. And so the city does a very good job of providing fair housing, education, outreach, and other services. And what we recommend is that this continue. HUD is not providing any more additional funding for this, but this is definitely one of the most important actions that the city could be taking. And even if it's geared towards specific groups of in the community, not just the general public is important, but then also landlords, tenants, so that they understand their rights and their responsibilities, realtors, and also elected officials as well as appointed officials, so your planning and zoning commission members as well. So these are both elected and appointed positions. The holders of those positions turn over, and it's always good for individuals on elected boards and appointed boards and commissions to understand the gravity of the situation they're making as it relates to housing and housing-related decisions. So new development plans that are coming before you, a new comprehensive plan, new zoning changes, how will any of those aspects of governing the city on a day-to-day basis impact housing choice for members of the protected classes? Does it expand housing choice for them, or does it restrict it? So education and outreach is, there's always room for more. So as I said at the beginning, the next steps for this process include a public hearing 2 weeks from today, at which time you'll be asked to consider the AI document along with that 5-year consolidated plan that I mentioned and the city's annual action plan. And then again, the documents will be submitted to HUD before June 30th. And then the implementation of the AI, to show you the connection between this document and the two that will be presented along with it in 2 weeks, the consolidated plan and the annual action plan. The city will implement these recommendations that I mentioned through its annual action plan every year. And then at the end of each year, when the city, when Ms. Walker's department creates the annual performance report that's provided to HUD, the city has to report on the progress it made in implementing each one of those recommendations. And that concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Heckelson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As I look through this, I guess it is a very lengthy document, but 170 some pages or something. As I kind of went through it, I was looking at certain pieces, you know, and I can appreciate the language in there as far as non-discrimination, but then as what you have is one of those items that kind of says, let's discriminate. Let's discriminate against students that don't live on campus. You know, and as I read that, I kind of took a little umbrage, just that because personally I was a baby of 8 kids, Dad was a milkman, and I'd pay for my own school. And so if I knew that a government entity is saying, hey, don't let people that could live on campus, you know, I kind of, with that language, I know that's not what the intent necessarily is, but it says, don't let students, you know, students aren't just all wealthy. I mean, a lot of them are paying their own freight and they're all paying their own bills. So with that, I kind of really, you know, I don't like to see that is promoted in the way it's stated. Maybe you can help clarify.
Actually, if that's the way that you interpreted it, maybe we need to wordsmith it a bit more.
Yeah.
Or a bit better.
Okay. Thank you. There was a couple other things, you know, it said, you know, it was almost like a carte blanche statement that said, you know, a prima facie statement that says, lending discrimination exists. And with that, I recognize lending discrimination exists, but it's typically, all that I've ever seen, is based on credit score. You know, it's based on ability to pay. The city of Lynchburg, for example, gets discriminated against. We don't get AAA bond rates because we're a AA rated entity. So, you know, maybe that had existed. You know, I thought lots of these lenders, and I recognize that's not under our government purview. Those are individual banks or lenders. But you kind of said it as, you know, as it's a fact. Is there that really a fact in Lynchburg? That somebody would have an application and say, because of your race, we're going to deny you?
So 2 comments on that. When you talk about discrimination in this context, it's a discrimination against members of the protected classes. So when you said that, you know, the city's discriminated against because of its bond rating.
Well, anybody
that's
is.
not,
I mean,
okay.
citizens are too, because if somebody has a good credit score, they get a lower interest rate. If somebody has a bad credit score, they get a higher interest rate. I mean,
If only that was the only reason that banks made the decision, but it's not. And when you look at the data, quite frequently, you know, the rates for denials are higher among minorities than they are for non-minorities. And the rates for higher interest loans, unnecessarily higher interest loans, are also higher for minorities than they are among white households, white applicants. There's also the issue of, in the HMDA data, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, the HMDA database that we look at to identify these trends, when you look at the individual raw records, so everyone's basically their application, not the application itself, but the data that's taken from the application, a lot of the data that identifies race, ethnicity, and in some cases the gender of the applicant have not been completed by the bank. And so while you know, all the rest of the information is there, but those qualifications that speak to members of the protected classes are not included in those categories.
So are those on the applications? I mean, you know, so somebody's applying for a loan. I haven't applied for a loan in a long time, but I don't remember that I had to, you know, say what is my race. I mean, do you have to do that on an application for a loan?
That's where the data comes from, yes.
And maybe that's a problem. Maybe we need to not discriminate by race by having that even listed on the applications, which I realize isn't your purview, but if that weren't listed on there, then you couldn't say, well, it is based strictly on, you know, a credit score and credit risk.
But I don't think that that would be possible for everyone who looks at a credit at a mortgage application would have that type of a perspective. Lending discrimination occurs in the mortgage industry. It does. And there's lots of data and lots of studies that prove that. And so the city does provide housing counseling for individuals and families who are looking to buy a home, to encourage them to clear up their credit and how to apply for a mortgage loan. And you're right, there's nothing the city can do beyond that, because that is a private sector policy. But housing discrimination mortgage discrimination does occur.
So I guess I had several little things, which I'll try to be quick. With our CDBG, what we put on there is as far as the benefit of owner-occupied property. And on here, it clearly shows that if somebody occupies the building, which is less than half of the citizens, they have a lot more control. They don't have to raise the rent. They're not subject to a landlord not fixing up the place. So the more that is owner-occupied, where the person could buy it, I think the better. And I think with that, we can take policy that says, let's try to keep the taxes low on our property owners as much as we can, so more people, and the fees, so more people can buy. On page 69, I think that was very insightful for us. I think you had the Lynchburg median household income, which was relative to Virginia. And Lynchburg's median household income is 60% of the state average. Lots of time, and I think we can use that as just clear, kind of as we set policy, not necessarily in this facet, but as we're looking at that in the future, lots of times when our income is lower, we like to compete with the Joneses, and we need to recognize our income on average, the people paying the bills are 60% of state average, and just kind of remember that. You also had something in here that I thought was very insightful, which I've said for quite a long time, which is regarding how to get out of poverty. One of the items that you clearly listed on here is those that graduate from high school have double the income of those that are in poverty, just graduating from high school. The 2017 numbers that you had listed were, I think poverty numbers were about 12,000. You had our people here listed as 23,900, almost double, almost 200%, which was neat. You also had the correlation with regarding single parents in poverty. You talked about school proficiency and opportunity for those that are less fortunate to be able to move up. So I appreciate the document from that perspective. Some of the different items were very, I think, instructive, so for us to read and review. And I hope you can wordsmith that language, because it really was like, wow, because I recognize lots of people think people are going to college, so mom and dad are paying for it. Lots of people that have to pay it themselves, so.
That's true,
anyway.
and I do appreciate your in-depth reading of the document. Thank you.
A lot to read. Thank you.
Councilmember Wright, followed by Councilmember Pero.
Thank you very much for coming and preparing this presentation and the report. I agree. It's an insightful report. Just to sort of follow up on the question that was raised, when we talk about lending discrimination existing in the city, that's once you control. So the question was asked: Do certain classes of people, do protected classes of people get discriminated against? And I think the answer is, according to not just what you shared with us, but also what's in the report, is yes, it does. So I just want to confirm that's once you control for variables like income and say credit score, right?
Credit score is not provided as part of that document. Credit scores are locked tight, and nobody reveals them, including in those applications.
But studies on lending discrimination do take into account variables.
Do they include credit? I don't know. Credit scores, I don't know. I couldn't answer that.
Okay. But they do try to establish a baseline between folks applying for mortgages to determine whether or not, in the aggregate, discrimination exists on a large scale.
Yes, and there's been testing done as well,
Yeah.
paired testing in the mortgage lending industry that has identified it does occur.
So we can feel reasonably comfortable, that it also occurs here. Okay, and I guess this is more a question for the city leadership. Does the flume take into account this document or previous iterations of this document, the future land use map,
Oh, okay.
and housing impediments?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question.
Sure. I like the matching mask. It's really nice. Does the flume take the impediments outlined in this document into account?
It does. There's several factors that go into the future land use map. That's what you're referring to,
Yes,
right?
sir. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and so we look at where potential areas are for higher density or where there's opportunities to grow the city. We've talked about before in the past of, our boundaries are finite in the city, and so we have to figure out different ways to grow within the city, and that potentially is higher density housing, which can relate to affordable housing at times. So yes, it takes it into account.
Because I was going to say, we get a lot of applications for townhomes and apartment buildings, but these are often applications in areas of the community that are not sort of high opportunity for affordable housing, right? I'm thinking of like Timberlake, right, or
Meaning they're in lower income or lower opportunity or higher
they are
opportunity?
in relatively higher income
Okay.
neighborhoods, certainly less diverse neighborhoods. That's where most of our housing is being built right now, not in the census tracts you identified. And so I guess my question to the city is, should we be looking to the flume to help guide us? What are the tools that we should be using, leveraging, to sort of guide our decision making when those applications come before us to ensure that we are trying to tackle the impediments as outlined in this document?
Well, when development comes to you all, that's the private sector. And we don't sort of get to pick and choose which projects come before you all
Sure,
as
of
far
course.
as rezoning and things like that. But that map does sort of project, okay, this is the way the city wants to grow moving forward, and you all have adopted that as part of the comprehensive plan. It gets updated, every so many years, or you make map amendments to when those rezoning applications come in. It's tough to say that it's really an apples to apples kind of thing, but I would say that the map certainly takes it into account. But those decisions are up to council when they want to follow the future land use map, because it is just a guidance document. Whether or not you want to follow that or not is up to you all.
I guess then my ultimate question is, what should, and this, I know this is not necessarily the thrust of the report today, but what can we be doing as a council to encourage development of affordable housing beyond what we are currently doing with CDBG and home funds in the census tracts that have been identified? I suppose that's my ultimate question.
And the census tracts that have been identified as lower opportunity or higher? I just want to make sure I understand the question.
The census tracts, the recap
Okay.
tracts.
So there's this balance I think I mentioned, but what the city is responsible for doing is in those RCAPs, those concentrated areas of poverty, the city still has an obligation to invest in those areas and improve the quality of life for the low and moderate income people who live there. But that has to be balanced with creating affordable housing opportunities outside of those areas should people choose to move for whatever personal reason. To me, that's the most important word in the title, Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice, is the word choice. That's what it is. But then it's the city's responsibility to provide that choice, whether it's incentivizing the private market with creating rental units that are affordable to 60 to 80% of median household income as part of a market rate development in a higher opportunity area. There's other examples of how communities work to do that.
And then I guess one last question. Has a copy of this report been provided to GLTC, to their board or their leadership? Because I feel like one of the biggest tie-ins here is transit. And it would seem to me that they should probably be made aware of this conversation and be partners in this effort. So are we able to send them make sure that they have,
They were on our email list? Yes.
and all the board members were as well?
Not the board members, just GLTC, the administrator of GLTC.
Can this be distributed to the board, please?
Sure. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pero, followed by Vice Mayor Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What you just brought up there was quite interesting about the how to encourage or incentivize private sector development. That's hard. It's really, really hard, because to build an equal structure in an area where you can't sell it as much as an area where you could sell it for much more. And any developer is going to make that decision in a heartbeat unless there's some sort of government influence or incentive behind it. I think what you said about the Housing Authority is accurate, that the Housing Authority is an effective arm to do this. And the Housing Authority is actively working to promote the HCV program, as well as to recruit landlords in town or that are willing to join that program. And it's a tough sell. It's a very tough sell. Also, I'm a little concerned, following up on Councilmember Huggleson's questions about the data and the source of the data and not having all the data. It seemed like a very broad statement when you said that minorities are getting turned down more and their rates are higher. That's based off the application program. I can tell you without any doubt that the Housing Authority has an absolute blind eye when it comes to helping anyone that is needy, providing houses. We have this program, still do, called the Home Ownership Program. In the Home Ownership Program, we partnered with not mortgage companies, but with financial institutions, banks. And we basically we built a house and told the bank, found an eligible person that would like to own the house, that met the HUD requirements for the house, and said, look, we want this person in the bank, in the house. Bank, find something that they could qualify for a loan, and then the Housing Authority will have the second loan for the rest. They'll be forgiven over time. So I think there's a minimum threshold between $40,000 or $50,000 or something like in that neighborhood that they had to qualify for to get. And we can't get people to qualify. The banks can't qualify. So that would be a failed application, but it's failed on other reasons than a protected class. So I'm a little concerned about how the data is monitored, because we would have done anything to get those people in that house. They wanted the house, but as it was relayed to us, they didn't have the credit history to support that they could repay even a $40,000 note over 30 years. So I think there's another problem that is related to all this, and I'm just concerned about how I understand that you're not given all the information in the reporting criteria, and I think it's hard to make really good decisions without having all the information there, and that's hard. It puts you in a difficult spot. I'm not saying there isn't any class discrimination, but protected class discrimination, but there certainly shouldn't be in the major financial institutions, and I hope there wouldn't be in the mortgage brokers. But just an interesting point there. Lastly, it's not as much in the wording on impediment number 2 about student housing as it was how you explained it, because my antenna went up when you explained it at the council meeting also. But if you can find a way to make that a little bit better, so we're not pitting one group against another group, I think it'd be very good. I had something else, Mr. Wright, that you sparked that I thought was an interesting comment. I can't recall what it was, but I thought there was a way that I saw some sort of path, but I can't recall what it is. If I do, if it's okay, if it can come back to me. Yes, ma'am.
Could I respond to your question? Your point about how it's so difficult to get the private market investing in housing.
Please.
So what a lot of and there are some good examples across the country, but what a lot of communities do is they offer higher density incentive. So they incentivize the development. So if there's a 50-unit apartment complex being proposed, and if the city were to require, say, 10 units to be set aside for households at 60 to 80% of median income, then in exchange for that, the developer is allowed to build more units. And the other critical piece to that is what we found is when communities want to engage the private market in creating affordable units as part of a private market development, that there has to be some kind of a collaborative effort, whether it's a task force or a committee, where the city planning folks are working with developers to find what that, for lack of a better phrase, what that sweet spot is, because you can't just say, okay, we want 10% of the units across the board, because it might be that for a 15% additional density in the total number of units, it might be that they actually need 20% more density in order to make those numbers work, and they will tell you, what it is, so that their profit is the same because they get to build more market rate units as part of providing affordable units to the city. So there are some communities that are doing some pretty creative things, but providing an incentive of some type is one way that a lot of them are doing it very successfully.
Mr. Henry, have we looked at that?
So back in January, I think it was the white paper that was presented to you all. And that's referred to as inclusionary zoning, is what Marjorie is referring to. And that was one of the 10 recommendations that's within there. It takes a lot of work to get to that point. We do have density bonuses right now built into the city's zoning ordinance. But those are certainly much more geared, what she is referring to is much more geared towards affordable housing. And so there's certainly ability to do it, but like she said, it's going to take some collaboration with the private development community, as well as folks within the city, making sure it's going to work.
Well, all in all, it sounds like a pretty easy lift. It doesn't require investment by the city other than time to make sure it's structured correctly.
Some of the complications are related to the monitoring of it too. Because once you've set that in place, there needs to be some sort of assurance that those units maintain to be affordable. What you see in a lot of communities is they'll set an affordability period, 15 years, maybe 30 years, something along those lines, and then the requirement goes away. But yeah, there's some oversight involved.
So can I ask, are you on the board or with the Housing Authority?
I'm the chair of it, and
Okay.
Ms. Tweedy is,
So-
Mayor Tweedy is also. So I was going to say maybe we should contract with those developers and require them to have a housing choice voucher program for those units.
And in Montgomery County, Maryland, which has the most successful inclusionary rental and home ownership program in the country, they use their housing authority to qualify all of the renters because they already have that mechanism in place. They know how to do that. And that would alleviate the burden from the city, but the housing authority knows how to income qualify tenants. So,
Absolutely.
just a thought.
So that could be, that housing choice voucher program could be a way to do that. I think, Madam Mayor, I think that's a pretty easy thing. I know that there's a lot on the city's plate right now, but maybe that could be, we could prioritize that or at least accelerate it in the priority list. So that would be something I think council should consider. And then last thing that occurred to me now, what it was, and had nothing to do with Mr. Wright. In fact, it was the private development conversation I was just having. It was what Mr. Wright reminded me of. But what you had mentioned about investment the terminology is slipping, but the urban residential district. I'm going to call it the urban residential district. Those are the census tracts in the core, I guess, core of the city, in the old part of the city. What you said about investing in those areas, I think, is important, and I would like to see that. And as I mentioned to council before, I think it's in those kind of emerging areas that city investment with city infrastructure using CDBG funds, street lights, sidewalks, improvements, so forth, it can really, I think, be a catalyst to just improving the housing and housing stock there. Of course, then, Mayor, I'm aware of this. You have to worry about gentrification and the balance between such. But I think I support your idea there about the investment very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Okay, so my question was about, I think I read that 14%, there was a 14% disability rate among people 18 years and older. And is that like all physical disabilities, or would that some be mental disabilities? I mean, and 33%, I think it was, were in poverty. And I'm wondering how we compare to other cities our size in terms of that number, because that certainly would contribute to our overall poverty rate. And my other question is, what is your recommendation that we do in terms of finding housing for these people? I know Rush Homes does a fantastic job, and we probably need more of that. And I don't know if you had a recommendation in your.
So in terms of the data question, I can't specifically name another community, but I will tell you that in every community we work, the trend is the same.
Okay,
So persons with disabilities are more likely to live in, have a higher rate of living in poverty than persons without disabilities. So as it relates, whether it's 15% here or 30% somewhere else, I'd have to, I don't know it off the top of my head. But the trend is the same.
That would stand
Right.
reason, but the percentage rate kind of intrigued me, because I was wondering, we do have a high poverty rate here too, and I'm just wondering if that contributes to part of it.
And then, I'm sorry, the second question was
So it was
on,
like, what?
the housing for
Yeah.
persons with disabilities. That's a difficult one, because that one's very expensive as well. And you do have a wonderful community partner in Rush Homes, because Ms. Walker took us to show us some of those units, and they're beautiful. What a lovely community the newer one is. And so a lot of communities are looking to, a lot of communities are looking to even offer programs that do things like ramps. Do y'all do ramps and bathroom modifications? No? Okay. So sometimes they use their funds for that, so that people can stay in their home. And the thing about providing accessible housing to people with disabilities is it's people who have a long-term or chronic disability, but then also people who become disabled, whether it's due to an illness or an accident or whatever. And so in order to keep them in their homes, these modifications need to be made. And then there's also the issue of when you're allowing new homes to be built, what kind of accessible features are you requiring, whether it's visitability, so that someone can enter a new home, a no-step entrance, a 36-inch wide door, room to maneuver in a bathroom. There's some universal design and visitability standards that could be incorporated, but otherwise it's really a matter of building a house for someone with a disability, or making the physical modifications within the home, so that they
have
can.
some programs in Lynchburg that do that, so that's great. Thank you.
Councilmember Wilder?
Again, thank you for the information. This is very informative. I really appreciate it. Just going back to one of the questions from Councilman Perro, he mentioned about the gentrification. What are some of the areas, the best ways to address that? Would it be through the inclusionary zoning or the density bonus zoning, or what are some of the areas you found? I know you mentioned about the program in Montgomery County, Maryland. What are some of the areas to address that?
So in terms of gentrification, typically, it's the private market that's reacting to where it's most profitable to develop, which tends to be lower income neighborhoods closest to an inner city downtown, which is how gentrification most often occurs. And then there's displacement of long-term residents. So some communities, I think in Philadelphia, they have a program that assists long-term homeowners. So if a homeowner has lived there for maybe 10 years, at least 10 years, there's a tax abatement that they offer those homeowners to keep it affordable for them to live, because what'll happen is the taxes will start to rise. And if the city can basically freeze their taxes, they're more likely to stay in those homes. For renters, one of the strategies that we see is if there are structures that either a nonprofit organization or even like a tenant co-op can acquire in order to keep those units affordable. That's another way to keep long-term renters and even new renters who are income eligible to be able to live in that neighborhood. And other communities will do first hire programs, so trying to employ local residents for businesses that are beginning to develop in gentrified areas. But it does require a very specific and committed strategy from a community in order to enjoy the benefits of gentrification while protecting the existing residents, renters and owners, as well as existing small businesses. And it takes an effort, but it is, there, with a good strategy in place, you can eliminate some of the displacement that would occur.
Thank you.
I have a question. When we're discussing specifically areas of a city, and not necessarily Lynchburg, but maybe other cities that you worked in or see the trends, when the pockets of poverty are concentrated to certain tracts and an overabundance, does that usually possibly allude to the history of some systemic racism that allowed for those tracts to become that level of poverty and or non-white residency? So in other words, prior to the development of the commercial land in the areas of potential gentrification, when property values, commercial values went up, then all of a sudden you saw that there was no development in those areas. And did they also potentially have the historical look of a lot of nonprofit agencies and those supportive service agencies to people all being concentrated in those areas as well?
So to answer the first question, we did include a copy of the historic redlining map for Lynchburg, and there are some areas that are identified as D, which were hazardous areas in terms of mortgage companies and appraisers, basically redlining them out of mortgages from 1937 on. We worked in another community, Louisville, Kentucky, where it's even more pronounced. And I know it's a much larger city, but if you look at a lot of the redlining maps from 1937, early 1940s, and you overlay your low and moderate income census tracts for many of the cities for which those redlining maps exist today, they're the same areas that have been heavily disinvested since that time.
So in communities where there was a incredible denial of redlining or denial of the systemic outcomes due to that type of behavior, what happens if we don't comply with what we're talking about now? HUD funds, CDBG, this AI. What's the potential when we don't comply, or we say we're not going to, or we don't believe that it occurs in this way, and we rework the language?
So there have been some very well-known instances. One in particular I'm thinking about where HUD, after several years of arguing back and forth with the grantee community, which is what Lynchburg is, a grantee community, they were stripped of their, HUD took away their funding. HUD took away their funding for a year or more. And that's typically what will happen. HUD will, you have a HUD representative in the Richmond office, and they're aware of what's going on in Lynchburg. And so, for example, if a low-income housing tax credit project was proposed for a higher opportunity area, not necessarily maybe the highest, but even just a higher opportunity area, and for families, and if that was denied for no other reason than because of who would be living there and the public opposition, maybe even political opposition, which happens in a lot of communities, HUD could require to see a copy of your AI if they haven't read it, and then they'll start taking a closer look, and they'll ask you to explain things, and this can go back and forth and back and forth. The most serious thing that I've seen in grantee communities is that their funds are withheld. And in some cases, the communities have given up their entitlement status rather than fight HUD.
Okay,
That's a very severe response, but that can happen.
Thank you. And with the talk of discussion, because we do serve on the Housing Board, of developing families and persons in the areas of being able to qualify, if you take the holistic picture of where, again, we talk redlining, again, we talk education, and we bring it up to now in workforce development. If we are not offering also the opportunities for workforce training and credentialing and development education, because through the housing dollars, we're not offering those programs available to recipients of the Section 8 voucher, whether it's career workforce development. Is that something that communities address too in this type of, because I know there are housing authority programs and we know we don't have them or have not had them here. And so now we're hopefully going to have them. But is that also something that's taken into consideration when they look at why we're not moving people into a choice environment maybe, or a choice living situation?
Yeah, so there's two issues there. The first is there are maps in the document that show where your CDBG and home investments have been made, and where the housing choice vouchers and where the public housing are located, developments are located. They're not all concentrated in those three. The rates of housing choice vouchers are higher in those areas, but there is some dissemination across the city. And you have developments, affordable or what we call assisted housing, anything that has some public subsidy tied to it outside of those areas. So you are doing a good job in that area. When I gave that extreme example of HUD taking away the money, that was for communities that just aren't even interested in building outside of the LMI areas. That's where affordable housing should be built, is what they think. But unfortunately, what that does is perpetuate those established residential segregation patterns. So the other point I wanted to make too is that no community can build their way out of an affordable housing problem or crisis, which is starting to envelop even more communities now because of the pandemic. And so to have a partner strategy with affordable housing development, whether it's new construction or rehabilitation for preservation, but to have a partner strategy that involves workforce development, training, job training, education training, small business development, any of those strategies that help to improve the economic sustainability of individual households and local businesses is good, because you, in addition to improving their own household income or individual income, that will lower their cost of housing. They'll have more disposable income for their housing costs as well as all the other costs that they have.
Thank you. And this is my last statement, just because I asked those questions so the viewing audience can hear and see some of this information that we do have. And also because nowadays we know that just a high school diploma is not enough, and or the income level needs to be so high with a high school diploma that it allows the affordability of the housing we're talking about. And so I think just setting the bar as just having a high school diploma, you earn more, that's true, but a lot of people in our community and outside of the community have that, and they are still working poor. And so that's why that's the reality that we see. And so I just wondered if that was also across the community as well.
It is.
Or other cities.
It is. It's. I don't want to say that Lynchburg is not unique, because you are in very many ways, but in a lot of these trends and conditions that we've identified, and the impediments that we've identified, we see that they vary a little, but not very much.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from anyone? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Ms. Walker, anything else you need from us, or? Okay, thank you. All right, next is receiving an update on the status of brush and bulk collection during the COVID-19 pandemic. very popular topic. So, and this is Mr. Weldica and Ms. Hart.
Mayor, may I add?
Yes.
Just say something really quickly. So this weekend, we're at home, and on my street, there's been a significant pile of brush and bulk, but I have not called you because I knew that you were backed up terribly. And those trucks were running running Saturday and Sunday throughout the weekend. And it's the first time I've seen them doing that. So Ms. Hart, so thank you.
Thank you, City Council, for allowing me to present on this topic. It is a hot topic with our citizens for sure. As you are well aware, the governor closed schools and non-essential businesses in mid-March of this year, and this resulted in more citizens staying home, providing child care, or maybe due to layoffs, or just working from home. And we saw right after people started working from home or being at home more, a huge increase in residential trash as well as brush and bulk. Other Virginia cities are experiencing the same thing. We sit in on phone calls and we're hearing that this is all cities. So people are struggling with their residential trash as well as their brush and bulk. So today we're going to just update you on what we've done operational-wise with brush and bulk to try to catch up. And also Joanne Martin's going to give you an update on the communications plan as it relates to brush and bulk. So we'd like to start with a video that Communications and Public Engagement created for us, updating citizens on the status of our current brush and bulk collection. So Phil.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Klein. I'm the Solid Waste Collections Manager for City of Lynchburg. I'd like to talk to you today about bulk and brush collection in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Bulk and brush collection as a rule has been a difficult task for the City of Lynchburg to overcome. But in recent times with the COVID-19 pandemic and more people at home doing yard work, it has made our workload, as you can see, even more difficult to keep up with. I currently have 5 teams working every day, 8 to 12 hours, to try and collect as much of the material as we can. And we also have other departments assisting us on the weekends working 12-hour shifts to also help collect the material as it continues to grow, both bulk and brush. Behind me is just a fraction of just the brush that we collect. The bulk goes to the landfill, of course. Some things that you can do to help us out. Make sure your bulk and brush are separate, away from power lines, away from mailboxes, vehicles, and fire hydrants. It allows us to be able to collect it in a more efficient manner and helps you to get it unsightly messes out from your front yard. So say you see a truck coming down the road, but they pass you by and they collect your neighbor's pile. The trucks are specifically picking up one type of pile. So if they pick up brush, that's all they're going to collect on that route. If they're picking up bulk, that's all they're going to collect. But don't worry, another truck's going to be following behind them shortly to collect your specific pile. All right, so let's talk briefly about some material that should not be in your bulk and brush piles. Again, let's try to keep your bulk and your brush separate as they're going to 2 separate locations. But for your bulk piles, we ask that you don't put bagged material in the pile itself. The reason for that is it gets picked up by a giant metal claw, and when that claw picks up the bag, it's going to tear. So please, no bagged material in your pile. We also ask that you don't put any hazardous waste in there. What is hazardous waste? That could be paint, solvents, chemicals, anything you may have to wear a glove or a mask to use. Please don't put it in the pile for the same reason. Not only is it a danger when they pick it up, but if it spills, then it becomes an environmental hazard. We also ask for no medical waste and no construction debris. If you do have construction debris, take it to the livestock road location. They can take your material there, but unfortunately, we don't have the capability to pick that material up. Keep it to your basic overflow cardboard boxes, large items such as furniture, appliances. That's what your bulk service is mainly for, and we can get that picked up efficiently and promptly for you. So currently our lead time is roughly 4 to 6 weeks for collection. just simply due to everyone's at home putting out a lot of material, and we have reduced staffing and reduced vehicles to collect it. So please, all we ask is you be patient. Understand we love Lynchburg as much as you do. All of us are citizens as well, and we want to see it as clean as possible. So please have patience for us as we continue to clean. We will be on your block to get your pile.
And I'm very thankful to Joanne Martin and her staff. They help us with all of our public relations, but they have definitely been very helpful during this time. We've taken many steps to try to accommodate our increased bulk and brush setouts, and some of that is we trained all Public Works CDL holders in trash collection. And it was a very thorough training. They learned the side loader, the rear loaders, the knuckle booms, our den animal truck. They learned everything and how to operate it. Originally, we did that because we feared that what if our refuse staff got a rash of COVID-19, and so we'd have people to back that up. So that's what we originally did it for, but certainly it has come in handy with this increased tonnage to have these extra people that know how to operate these vehicles. Again, very thorough training pre-trip, how to check the truck out. So it was a very thorough training. They actually got to drive back up probably about a half a mile with the truck and then dump it, trying to give them some real life experience before they got on the road. We actually made a full temporary assignment. We moved a talented buildings employee that's a good equipment operator and can collect a lot of brush and bulk. We moved him down there temporarily. Once we get through this, we'll move him back to buildings, but he's helping down there full time, basically. And then we're moving Public Works employees to the refuse division as needed. So if we get a call that 2 trucks are sitting in the morning, we'll deploy Public Works employees down to refuse, pick those trucks up, and we will get them into the field. This is the schedule change that Councilman Pero talked about. We have basically made a drastic schedule change. Again, originally we did this to potentially social distance our crews because the workspace is tight, so we were just trying to social distance our crews. So we basically have a shift and a B shift. And this primarily streets and grounds. The A shift works Sunday through Tuesday, 12 hours a day, and then 4 hours on Wednesday. And the B shift works Tuesday through Saturday, 12 hours, and then 4 hours on Wednesday. And what that has allowed us to, number one, I need to reiterate that this is all straight time. We've been getting comments on social media that we're out here in overtime, cutting grass and wasting time, and that's not true. This was primarily for social distancing purposes, so these employees are working regular time when they're out on Saturday and Sunday. We have been allowed, because of the schedule change, we have been able to redeploy streets employees are collecting brush and bulk on Saturdays and Sundays, 12 hours per day. A limiting factor there is that the regional landfill is only open 4 hours a day on Saturday. So once the landfill closed, we're somewhat limited on what we can pick up with bulk. We did pre-position some large containers at our refuse site, so we collect through Saturday afternoon, and once those are full, we have nowhere to take them. So then we move into brush collection and spend the rest of Saturday and all day Sunday primarily focusing on brush collection if those containers are full. So that's how we've been kind of trying to work with getting more done. Clearly, we're getting more brush and bulk is set out, but we're not able to pick up more because we still have the same amount of trucks. And we're deploying them 12 hours a day, which really is not probably good for them, but we are doing that. At first, when COVID-19 hit and we were asked to save money, we cut all the overtime out for brush and bulk. Recently, I have reinstituted overtime just for that service. So Monday through Friday, you're going to see people out probably 12 hours a day trying to pick this brush and bulk up. So we have gone back to an overtime status. I did check with the city manager about that and decided it was prudent to try to do so just to try to catch up. We also have a hiring freeze, although just recently, again, I got permission to fill a refuse position, so we plan to try to move ahead with that. Even during normal brush and bulk, as you all know, we have challenges, and we have always had to work overtime 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours, sometimes 14 hours a day, just to keep up with normal collection. So obviously, with the extra tonnage that we're getting, we are very much clearly behind. We also have, and I think I've mentioned it before, brush tonnage is not right now being recorded, and that is due, we've got a scale down at the Concord Turnpike Convenience Center. That's where our wood waste area is. So we are driving around the scale, and we do that for a number of reasons. Number one, we want to stay being productive and not standing in a line at a scale. And plus, we're just going to create more congestion for the citizens that are trying to use the site. So we're deferring and allowing citizens to have that, and we're just not going to record our tonnage. So our additional challenges are, the normal operational demands have continued. We have 4 knuckle booms available at refuse. There is a 5th truck assigned to buildings and grounds. It is used primarily for Asplin support, but it is made available on nights and weekends. Trucks sometimes go out of service, and that's for preventive maintenance, warranty work, or potentially repairs. So we're trying our best to keep these trucks on the road, but things do happen. We also have conflicts with emergency tree response. Probably it's been about a month ago, we had a lot of heavy rains, probably 2 weeks in a row. During that period, we had trees go down. We had to pull a knuckle boom to actually get those trees out of the road, probably almost spent a 12-hour day doing that. So again, sometimes they get pulled for tree emergencies as well. Some potential proposed additional resources is to purchase 2 additional knuckle boom trucks with CARES funding for $340,000. You're going to get a complete packet, I believe, at your next city council meeting talking about all the CARES funding, but we feel, and I have been working with our chief financial officer, we feel that we can purchase 2 knuckle booms with this CARES funding. So that is going to be proposed next week by the long-range recovery team. We potentially could contract with Asplin, our forestry contractor, for 2 or 3 chipper crews to chip brush. That would cost us about $2,500 a week. We're thinking use them maybe about 12 weeks, potentially. So that's another option. And potentially we could contract with a small hauler if they could meet the city's requirements for the bidding process. We would have to pay for that with local money if we didn't bid it out, and there is going to be some procurement issues with that, but I think that possibly we could work with a small hauler potentially. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanne Martin, Director of Communications and Public Engagement, and she'll tell you about what she's doing to help us communicate with our citizens.
Good evening. As Gaynell said, we've been working with Public Works to try to get information out to the public. You've already seen the video. That'll be in heavy rotation, both in social media and LTV. We're also doing targeted social media, Facebook, Nextdoor, if you're all familiar with Nextdoor, and with Instagram. Additional information on our website. We're having radio spots that we'll be playing that information, the city source, which is a full page that we do monthly in the News in Advance. Citizens First will be given additional information, so when people call in to complain or to talk about their brush or bulk that's been sitting out, so make sure they have the proper information to explain why it's been out there and what the city is doing, and also how citizens can help. And I'm sure all of you have your cell phones, and we hope that all of you have uploaded the city's app all of you have the city app on there, because we know that we've got lots of city employees who are out and about doing city business on a daily basis. And there is on the city's app, there is, which all of you I know very well, there is a place where you can report an issue. So we're asking both citizens, all of you, and city employees, if you see a pile of brush or bulk out, to go ahead and report that in. That will come to Citizens First, and then that will go and to track it, or it will go into Public Works. And so to let know that, because even though our refuse collectors and Public Works folks do a great job at reporting that, once in a while they may miss a pile, but this way we'll make sure to get that. You can take a picture. You don't have to put in the address. If you're standing there in front of that pile, it'll automatically populate the address. You can take a picture of it, send it all in. My folks at Citizens First will get that and report it, because we really need everyone to work together. We're all, as Jeremy said in the video, we all live here. We want the city to look good. We're all invested in that, and we need everyone to pull together, work together to get it done. We're in extraordinary circumstances. They're working really hard, so we need to help them along the way. So again, we're trying to pull it all together. This is no extra cost, and what we're doing, we're using existing resources to get the message out. So the message, make sure that people understand what they should put out for bulk and brush and what's not allowed. We're putting out information about all the ways they can dispose of their items, and also we're explaining to them why we're behind in getting these things picked up and how they can help us. So if you have any questions, I'll turn it back over to Gay now.
Thank you. Councilmember Hegelson, followed by Councilmember Pero.
Thank you, Gaynell. This is obviously, lots of us have seen this and appreciate you taking action. I've mentioned this to you a lot, and thank you very much. As we look at these items, I do hope that what we can do, it almost gets worse and worse as the weeks go on, and you guys are working hard. I appreciate having the additional items 2 and 3 on here, where we could contract out, where we could get wood chippers, where we could get trying to start making headway. It's interesting with all these, the emergencies and things. We have a difference between essential and non-essential employees throughout the country, but also with the city. And obviously, your people are doing a great job because they're working around the clock. Our fire department, our police department, around the clock, and I appreciate that. And so as much as we can do to help with this, this is really critical now. It's amazing how it's, and it says a bad image for our city too. So thank you for helping this. When people come to visit and they see that, I had a guy just said, oh, they had guests coming in, and it's, it can be a little embarrassing when you see pile and pile and pile that sat there. So thank you very much, and hopefully we can do this fairly quickly, because it's the piles are built, and the sooner you can get to it. So are these two, number 2 and 3 on your list, needed to be done fairly quickly? Or I recognize the CARES Act is going to take a while, and that's going to take a long time to bid and acquire and get the funding to buy the trucks. Then it's going to take a bit of time to hire and fill that. So number 2 and 3 on your list would be probably fairly quick, couldn't it be?
Well, actually, let me address number 1 first, because that's not exactly right. We actually have located 2 knuckle booms on a lot.
Okay.
And so they're available now.
Okay.
So we could get them probably within a month at the very, very latest, I would think. So I think that that's what we plan to do there. We are not asking for additional staff. What we plan to do is
Just use it more, okay.
yeah, and actually, when trucks go down, we'll have a backup, so we could take that driver and just put him in another truck, or we could pull in other public works employees to operate those trucks. So that's what the plan is there. The contract with Asplund, we do have a forestry contract. With that is probably something that could be done fairly quick, because it's just a matter of making a phone call. Probably we could get a contractor in here, Asplund contractor in here in probably a week or two, I would think. So that should be fairly quick. It's just we'd have to find funding to identify to pay for that. The small contractor is a little bit more of a challenge. We would need to get prices, and I'm going to have to work with procurement on that. I'm not saying that it's impossible. Anything is doable, and we're being flexible during this time to get things done. So I think it can be done. Certainly any lead someone has about someone that might be interested in this, if they would give me a call, that would be awesome, so that I can start finding these folks that might be interested in assisting us.
Because, you know, like you mentioned, which I figured it'd be a lag, the knuckle boom's even a month from now, because this has been going on for several months already, so another month, you know, anyway, it's just the sooner the better. As far as I'm not sure exactly what they do, but I do recognize, like, we have a towing contract, well, with Beeline.
Right.
And they may not do hauling, but I think their business has been pretty curtailed. They're slowed down tremendously because Liberty University has been out of session. They do a lot of contracting there as far as towing illegal parked cars. That may be something, again, just threw that out there at the top of my head since you suggested that. Hopefully we can find other contractors fairly quickly. I guess it would be just a matter of figuring out how to compensate them, you know, if they can't get across the scales because one scale is broken.
Well, and they would actually be required to go to the livestock landfill.
Okay.
So and they would be able to get our rate, our tipping fee rate, because they would be working for us, is my understanding of that. So.
And so the more that they pick up, the more they drop off at the landfill, the more they would get paid, I would assume. I would assume it's not just based on hours, it would be kind of actually tonnage somewhat, or?
Yes, we would
Yeah.
pay the tipping fee, and then I'm sure there's going to be some type of an hourly fee.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. But I hope whatever we can do for that, I know if we can get that Asplund thing, we do, obviously have probably money in the reserve to get that, you know, as quickly rolling, unless you can do that within, you know, your own budget. Whatever we can do, I think the citizens would appreciate it, because it is pervasive. It's not just in Ward 1, it's not just in Ward 2, it's across the entire city. I think that is something that is needed, so thank you.
Okay.
If I can just say that third point, I did ask Mr. Wodeca and Ms. Hart to look at, because small businesses are able to get into places, neighborhoods, know where piles are. They may live in the neighborhoods and own smaller businesses. And what people look at is when we get these funds for emergency, they go to the huge companies, the huge corporations, and small businesses have been suffering too, in particular of getting out and doing what would be normal spring work and gardening and landscaping and all of these businesses that normally would be out there because of COVID, that if they have equipment and they are able to comply with the city's procurement services and whatever our requirements are, that they could be utilized in their own neighborhoods and or throughout the city. So that's why I asked if that could be looked at as an option, especially during now in COVID, and to address that, because we've had this, as Councilmember Hegelson said, as an ongoing problem.
Yes, I agree.
I just want to add that there. Thank you, Councilmember Pero.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm coming up with a similar point. So CARES Act funding couldn't be used for chipping, contract work for chipping, you don't think?
I'm not sure about that, because it's COVID-19 related, and I don't know. I think we can say that trash potentially has potential for COVID-19 exposure,
Okay.
either to citizens or our own employees.
Oh, so the new trucks would be specifically for the bulk pickup, but they'd also, you know, but that just increases your fleet.
That it would increase the fleet and increase our capacity now and into the future to be able to provide this service. So
Right.
yes.
So it seems to, well, this is an operational question. So currently, you take the you saw on the video, the piles of brush, they get chipped somewhere?
Those are actually, we contract with someone that brings in a tub grinder. So we've got a wood waste storage area, and we contract with a contractor or a vendor that brings in his tub grinder probably 2-3 times a year. So that's just a huge pile of brush that we have stored.
Which is potentially a fire hazard. So I'm thinking, operationally, is it better for us to, instead of picking up the brush, just chip it on site?
Probably it's not going to be quite as quick and efficient because they're going to have to pull the brush out and then feed it through a chipper.
So you've worked that?
Yeah, we've thought about that. I think actually picking it up with a knuckle boom might be probably a little bit quicker, but the employees, the Aspen employees, are going to have to pull the brush pile apart and run it through the chipper. So might be a little more labor intensive, but I think it still might be worth doing. We actually did it during, wasn't the derecho, we did it during a storm in the 90s that we had. We had Aspen come in to do a tremendous amount of chipping during one of our summer storms. It was, I think, the straight line winds. We actually used an Aspen crews to help us chip up the brush.
Well, was that the one in 93 that was just covered in the newspaper as being the anniversary just a couple days ago?
I got so many storms in my mind, I don't keep the year straight, but it's either 93 or 96. I can't remember. There was an ice storm in there too. So,
okay, so that'd be interesting if you could do some sort of study. I agree with Councilmember Eggleston. Try to get the ASFunding crew in and do some sort of analysis on how they're doing. I'm thinking to myself, you can probably get more bulk in a truck after it's chipped, so you can be more efficient with the crews on the ground. It may take longer to do it, but you may have less loads that you're pulling out. So it'd be interesting to study using a contract and then do some analysis about the best way to do it. But and then I'll think about private contractors. And to the mayor's point, I had a large contractor in mind, but that's, you certainly would like to see small contractors doing this. There are disaster recovery people, and I'm sure they charge FEMA rates, which are way beyond our pay scale, I imagine.
yes, that's my fear. So that's why I think the idea, if we can find a smaller contractor, I think that the rates would be more favorable to the city for sure.
I had a question. Someone asked me, in other areas, when we do the chipping and that sort of thing, and you said we had a pile, so help me understand. They said they go to their city and they purchase landscaping mulch.
Yes.
And so do we do that, or is that an opportunity, or is it more labor intensive if we went that way in the future?
Yeah, it would require some additional resources on our part. Typically, you'd have to monitor, you'd have to have the pile of mulch, you'd have to have somebody there monitoring so people wouldn't throw out garbage there. So you'd kind of have to man that site. So there would be some logistics with it that we would really need to think through to make it a good program. I will say that if citizens want mulch, the Aspen crew, it's going to be green mulch, but the Aspen crew will bring mulch to your house and dump it while they're working on city trees. And we have to look at the site. We don't go just on private property and people need to sign a hold harmless and all that. We will deliver those chips to people if they want them. They just will need to sit for a period of time before they can be used. But it would take some logistics and some thinking through before we could offer it to citizens.
So is that at no cost that Aspen will come and offer that?
I don't imagine that they would. I'm thinking that they're, I'm talking about our current Aspen crew now will actually deliver chips, but our current crew will do it now. So that's an opportunity. We also may have an opportunity with the wastewater treatment plant. They were looking for organic material for some purpose down there at their plant, and I can't recall the purpose, but we were thinking we could partner with them potentially and use these chips to supplement what they need for their process at the plant.
Okay, because they did say mulch and compost in other areas, and so I thought I'd bring that up right now as a thought.
Yeah, a lot of cities do offer compost or like even leaf compost, and again, we'll deliver a pile of leaves to your house in a truck if you want them.
All right, Councilmember Nelson, thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Mayor.
Who's asking for those leaves, can we have them delivered to somebody else's house?
Ms. Hart, I really do commend you and your staff for the creative, innovative way in which you've adjusted to the challenges to use your resources in a highly efficient way. It's good to hear. I had two questions, and maybe Ms. Witt would answer the first, but I don't have the CARES regulations in front of me, but my recollection was that if we request a refunding or a compensation under the CARES, and we have already budgeted for that expenditure, then it would not be eligible for reimbursement. Is that right? Let me just yes or no.
That is correct.
Okay.
But we budgeted to purchase an additional knuckle boom in 2021. But the way the CARES Act funding is worded, it cannot be budgeted in the current adopted budget, which would be fiscal year 2020. So that's why we're going to go ahead and buy them as of 2020, and we will not buy that additional one in 2021.
All right. Thank you. That was the second part of my question, is the fact that it's budgeted in a future year does not disqualify it because it's not budgeted in this year.
Correct. And just so you know, we're working really closely with our external auditors because they will be reviewing all of our purchases with the CARES Act funding to make sure they qualify. And because that's part of what they will be doing under the Single Audit Act because they're considered grant funds. So we are working very closely with them, and they agreed with us on this. So we
Very
ran
good.
it by
So
them.
we get ahead of the game a little bit
Yes.
here. The second question dealt with what you alluded to with regard to the lost weight of the brush that's not going over the scales. Is that a lost opportunity for reimbursement since you're not recording that weight, or is that not something we'd be compensated for anyway?
Again, I think the feeling is that brush is not going to be COVID-related.
Okay.
So I don't think, I understand that in some of the phone calls, our finance team is sitting in weekly phone calls, that people are potentially looking at additional tonnage for refuse and brush and bulk. But I just don't feel like we've picked up enough that it's going to be a significant increase, particularly in this year's budget. And again, I'm seeing that I'm not sure that brush is going to be considered COVID-related.
The generation of the brush would be COVID-related, but the creation of the brush is not.
Correct.
All right. Certainly, it's not like the derecho storm, or I think it was June 1993, in fact, June 10th, 1993, that we had that straight wind storm that knocked down the fly tower at the Academy and the steeple at First Baptist Church on Court Street and a lot of other things.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
further thing? Any other questions or, okay. All right, thank you for that presentation. Next is update to the revenue collections received and several key city revenue sources. Ms. Witt.
Just a second as Starlet puts this in for us. You should have a single piece of paper front and back where we updated those numbers this morning based on the deposits yesterday. Just a minute. So this is all really good news, I think. So we're looking at the what has come in through June 8th. So if you start with the net real property, we were anticipating $60,338,212, and so far we have received $60,393,330. So we have collected $55,000 in addition to what we anticipated. I will tell you that money is still coming in. So this number is going to continue to go up, and also the billings and collections staff will do a delinquent notice before the end of June as well. So those funds will continue to come in through the end of the year. Our net personal property tax, we anticipated right at 18 million. We have gotten 19,275,000, which is 1.2 million over what we anticipate. But what you need to realize is a lot of our citizens will pay their first and second installment. The second installment is due December 5th. So as part of our general accepted accounting principles, we have to move that money into 2021. So we'll look at the payments that are made. We'll do an audit adjustment to actually move any payments for December 5th into 2021. So this number, while it looks like we're way exceeding our revenue collections, part of that will be for next year. So, and I know that they're still processing mail that they received for the June 5th payment. So this number is going to continue to get better. The net business license, we are anticipating right at $8 million. We've collected $8,451,000, so we're about $463,000 above projected, which is good news. And it's telling us that our businesses are doing okay, and they're able to pay their business license taxes. It's done really well, much better than what we anticipated.
Just to make clear that the revised FY 2020 budget includes the revised projections due to COVID.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, because we revised it to anticipate about a 10% allowance, but we're coming in above our revised budget. We're not quite to where our original budget was, but we're not that far off. We're only a couple of $100,000 off. So I think that's really good news.
That's incredible news. Yeah.
Yes. Councilman O'Hara?
And this just hit me, I should have seen this earlier. On the third column, could we change that to variance from budget or something like that? Because right now it says remaining to collect, but it's a positive number. It makes you think that you've got $55,000 more, or negative 19 as it was, when we got our council report. Yeah, just variance from budget.
Absolutely, not a problem. Okay, our next is the sales tax. Now, this is not the final number for April. Worked with our Commissioner of Revenue today. We don't actually get the payment from the state till about the 15th of the month, but in working with Commissioner of Revenue, he felt like this number is really close to what we're going to get. So $1,263,000, which would be almost $300,000 more than we projected to receive in April, which more than makes up where we were short in March. So I think that's a really good number too. We're only down about 3% compared to last year. Are you not finding it?
No. We're talking about something else.
Oh, okay, good. So I thought I missed something. And our meals tax collection for April, we've received $802,000. We anticipated $541,000, so we're about $261,000 above our revised budget for April, which more than makes up where we expected more for March. So that's good news, and you can see for May, we're already starting to get our next meals tax number in. So we should not have any problem meeting our revised budget for the year. In lodging tax, again, April came in far better than we anticipated. We anticipated getting about $11,000, but we got $60,603. So again, we're about $50,000 above what we projected. And again, we should not have any problem meeting our revised budget and exceeding it. Amusement tax, of course, we did not expect, with all events canceled, we didn't anticipate any money, but for April we did get $1,332, and we've already received $46 for May. So, and you can see we're about $9,000 for meeting budget. So Again, very minimal, but I think this is a really good report, and I'm encouraged that we really felt like April would be the worst month, because we had half a month of March that we thought would be okay, but we really felt like April would be the worst. So to me, this is credit to our businesses that are figuring it out and how to make this work. So I am encouraged.
Councilmember Wright?
Forgive me, I think it's just a credit to your team for taking a conservative approach when doing your projections. Better to be surprised than scared. So
Exactly.
so thank you very much for your sort of thoughtful approach here.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Next is the update on city actions regarding COVID-19. Mr. Wodaka, thank you.
Yeah, just this. No, it's just this one page, I think so. Well, good afternoon, everyone. There are 3 items that I want to discuss with you just very quickly. Should be, I'm not quite to it yet, so I'll be there in just a second. So 3 items for our emergency support functions that we have that I just want to point out that are great items. Our emergency support function number 5 wants to let you know that there will be a community testing event for COVID at the Community Access Network on Friday, June 12th from 11 to 3. There will be 200 testing kits available on a first-come, first-served basis. On ESF 14, I want to point out the long-term recovery. You heard Donna talk very briefly about the CARES money. They're working very diligently to outline recommendations on how those monies should be allocated. Departments have submitted requests to use that money, and so they are working feverishly this week to finish that recommendation, so they'll be doing that as well. And then lastly, the ESF 15 is our external affairs group. They're working to manage the implementation of the departmental items that need to be done so that we can reopen city buildings. So these are things like the floor stickers, PPE for city staff, et cetera. And so they're making sure that we have those items available to us and ready to reopen buildings as we get there. So we're working on getting buildings in shape to be reopened, and as they are ready, we will be reopening them with the review of the strategic management team. So the other item that I passed out that I wanted to just share with you, I've mentioned on a couple of these conversations about the employment situation in the city. And I just wanted to give you some feedback. I've told you some base numbers over time, but I wanted to show you some history over time in the last couple of weeks and how things have changed. As you can imagine, there was a significant increase in the number of initial unemployment claims throughout the city as COVID took off. Fortunately, that has peaked and seems to be going down now. Every week there's slightly fewer initial unemployment claims. Obviously, anyone that comes up is no good, and we are still elevated from where we were before the beginning of this, but we're not necessarily nearly as bad as we were at the peak, sort of at the end of March, early April. So that's a positive thing. And the next graph you'll see there is the weekly continued unemployment claims just for the city. And as you can see, we seem to have peaked a bit, and we're starting to see a decline in the continued claims. So these are folks that have been receiving unemployment benefits for multiple weeks in a row. So those are positive things. Again, still those numbers are way too high for our liking, but we think we're moving in the positive direction, and that certainly is related to the economy continuing to open back up. So certainly would take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Councilmember Pero.
All right, so just for clarification on this graph, the first one, if you were a new claim is somebody that becomes unemployed and is filing for the first time.
That's right.
So the number of initial filings where it peaked significantly then has started to decline. that number is going to hit a base trend number because there are always going to be people filing for
That's
new.
right.
Do we know what that base trend number is?
Well, if you look at the beginning before the shutdown started, we were at 36 and numbers before like that.
36,
I don't know
okay.
what the number is going to be, but we're going to see, I think that'll be in the hundreds, the low hundreds.
Okay,
Or
all right.
double digits.
And so this indication is there are people who are, the second graph is people that are stopped filing claims, basically. So that is continued unemployment claims. So they have to file week over week over week to get claims. However, if they stop filing, it's not a continued claim, and that is an indication that they're back at work.
Well, it could be either they've stopped
Or
filing
they
for
give
whatever
it up.
reason or whatever, but likely, hopefully, it's that they're back to work.
The fact that it's flattening and then declining is optimistic. So that's very, very, very good.
All right, great. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Okay, Councilmember Wilder.
About a testing for COVID, I believe you said. When is that again?
That is on Friday, June 12th, from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Community Access Network. I know I was quick through that.
No, that's okay. Councilmember Pero.
Question on that. Do we know what the test is for? Is it for active cases? Is it for the antibodies that show that you have been infected?
I don't know the answer to that question. I suspect it's probably active cases, but I will confirm that.
It would be nice if that would be publicly available, so, or just somehow clarified, because.
Sure.
All right. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Active cases. Okay, great. Active case.
They are advertising it.
Great. Thanks.
That's all your presentation?
So in other
Okay.
words, if you feel bad
Thank you.
and you think you might have, then you should go.
Yeah.
But if you want to just kind of figure out, like me, if you've had it or not, stay away.
It's a different test.
Let somebody else go.
Right. Thank you.
Also for those without insurance or underinsured.
Oh.
Okay.
So how are we communicating that to the public so that folks know? I saw an email on it, but not everybody gets that.
They are partnering with over 45 partnering agencies.
Okay.
And letting them know. And working with their clients, their patients, and also with their agencies that they work with on a regular basis. It is open to anyone with Medicaid, Medicare, or underinsured, but also they're working closely with those partnering agencies, so they're pretty sure that they'll be fine and be able to use the whole 200 tests.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is our roll call, and I'll start with Councilmember Nelson.
No items, thank you.
Councilmember Wilder.
I want to thank the staff for working so diligently during this COVID situation and all the unexpected items that have taken place. We appreciate that. And also, I know on the other night, a couple of us went to the fire person's graduation. So we want to commend the fire department for the graduation. I think it was about 10 persons. They graduated. One of my classmates, her daughter was in the program, so I was happy to see that. So I just want to commend them for the new class that came in. It was a really excited group. It was at the stadium, so it was a different venue, but I'm glad we had that for the students there. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wright.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to commend Lynchburg Rise and Lynchburg Students Rise, as well as Unity in the community, and the police department for coordinating the safe and I think really powerful protests that we saw this past weekend, reminding us that we need change here in Lynchburg. So I really appreciated those, and I was glad to be there with many of you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pero. Councilmember Helgeson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I got two kind of quick ones. One, as I see around the city, I'm just curious when the basketball goals and nets will be, they're blocked, so when they can be unlocked and where people can start playing basketball again. Obviously, I'm sure that may take some discussion. Secondly, wondering about like when a city employee has a complaint, I thought we had to, where does that go as far as like if a city employee has a complaint against maybe another city employee or a superior, I thought we have a
We have a
committee.
very formal grievance process.
Okay.
Hopefully, they will talk with the supervisor about it, and then it can either be resolved there, or it can get escalated to the employee grievance committee, the citizen, that includes citizens. And if it goes beyond that, it could go to the courts.
So is the normal process where, before it gets to the grievance process, is there normally like attorneys that are involved for the city that fight?
No, it tries to get mediated at the department level among supervisors and employees.
Okay, so it's not a normal protocol where a city or like an outside counsel would come in and intervene?
Typically not.
It depends, it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
So if there's an intervening factor that would require that, then we might ask for that.
I guess I'm asking that, especially in these uncertain times when you have somebody maybe in public safety that that lodges something where they maybe see something different, that hopefully it's fostered and encouraged to discuss and figure out what problems are, rather than legal counsel. So anyway, okay, thank you.
It could be in those situations that perhaps an outside legal counsel might be needed for assurance of the integrity of the conversation.
All right, anything else? Councilmember Hergelson, was that it?
Oh, yes, sir,
Okay.
sorry, yes,
All
sorry,
right,
ma'am.
thank
Yeah,
you.
Madam Mayor.
Vice Mayor Dolan?
Yes, well, I also was at the graduation/pinning ceremony and 10 new, but it was really exciting to see. I think there were 4 women. Is it 5? 5 women? Oh, it was just a beautiful ceremony. It was done really well, and I thank you, Chief Wormser, for having it at City Stadium where family, friends, and the community could go see all these wonderful young folks, and boy, they're young looking too. Thank you very much for that. Okay.
All right, thank you. And I also have been attending several of the events in Miller Park. Unity and Community had a meeting also here, or an outdoor event on the City Hall steps. This weekend, the NAACP, and for all of the organizations that are talking and listening and working together. So I want to say thank you. I want to say that it is an ongoing process, and nothing is built overnight. And so this will definitely, as it is for the nation, continue to be dialogue toward action and toward healing. So I want to thank everyone for those events, and we are recessed until 7:30.